Welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us as we discuss how to turn AI strategy into results for financial institutions. My name is Bruna Smith. I'm on the marketing team here at H2O.ai. And if you're new to H2O AI, we are a leading agentic AI company and pioneers of sovereign AI, delivering secure, private, and enterprise-controlled AI solutions. Over the past 13 years, we've grown into a trusted partner for major organizations, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, helping them to use AI to innovate faster, work smarter, and deliver real results. We've also been recognized in the top analyst reports by Gartner, Forrester, and CB Insights as a leader or visionary in the most recent Magic Quadrants and Waves. So I will stop the share and we'll have our speakers here just to talk about our webinar today. We will explore how AI can deliver real value for financial services. We're fortunate to have Chris Sivalingam, former AI leader at CBA and Scotiabank, and Mark Landry, who's a Kaggle Grandmaster and Director of Data Science here at H2O. And before I hand it off to our speakers, let's quickly go through a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please send them via the Q&A tab. We'll address them towards the end of the session. And this webinar is being recorded, so if you need to leave early or if you want to revisit the content, we will be sharing this recording via email in the next couple of days. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris and Mark. If you can please introduce yourselves before we dive into our questions, that would be great. Mark, Chris, you're on mute. Please, Mark, you can unmute.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Chris Sivalingam. I was the Vice President of Analytics at Scotiabank back in 2016-17 timeframe. And then I spent 5 years in Australia at Commonwealth Bank of Australia, working on various AI and customer engagement programs. And I'm very thankful and honored to be here and supporting this webinar.
Thank you, Chris. Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Landry. I've been at H2O for about 10 years, doing a few roles in that time. And as Director of Data Science and Product, worked with quite a few of our financial institutions, a lot about document AI, and kind of like visiting with them as, you know, we're all evolving on this journey of generative AI. So happy to be here.
Amazing. Thanks, Mark. So to kick things off, what are the biggest shifts you've seen in how financial institutions are thinking about AI over the past year? This question is for both of you.
So I think if I kind of speak to my journey, 2016-17, there's like, AI kind of really picked up. There was a lot of banks being a massive risk engine. It's a very risk-averse environment, so model risk management, and there was a lot of skepticism in terms of having an artificial intelligence component, kind of making recommendations, decisions, processing data at a financial services organization. But I think most of the banks have kind of evolved over time. The MRM function have evolved as well. Regulators have become they're kind of more able to get the transparency from AI, so that they are more comfortable adopting to the banks kind of moving into the AI space. and then last 2-3 years that the ChatGPT and the generative AI components evolved from the predictive side of things that we have seen in the past, and then now we're really getting into this agentic AI space where where you can get agentic components, agentic AI components that kind of enabling a autonomous unit of work, and with minimal interaction or minimal interference with the end user or customer, with obviously being in a supporting role, but autonomously providing a unit of function, encapsulating some of the generative AI as well as predictive AI functions behind the scenes. So actually it's a good good place to be in. And then I think next evolution is kind of now we are seeing a lot of kind of the agent builders, which or the kind of the driverless agents, where agents are being built by agent itself, where certain use cases within the financial services in the industry, like auditing, customer interaction, and we'll speak about that further. But that's where the industry seems to be going in the next 5 to 10 years.
And with so many Gen AI platforms flooding the market, benchmarks really matter, right? In March of this year, H2O achieved #1 global score on Gaia. That's the general AI assistance benchmark, one of the most rigorous evaluations of real-world AI assistance performance. And I would like to know, Mark, can you share what the Gaia leaderboard is all about and why it matters for the broader AI industry, especially in their enterprise settings like banking?
Sure. Yeah, the Gaia is a benchmark that tries to mimic more complex tasks. So I think the benchmark was created by people from Meta, Hugging Face, I think AutoGPT, Jan LeCun's on the paper. And so it was to create a test set that actually had kind of multi-step questions. And so, part of agents is interacting with tools. And, we've been trying to do that kind of for the last 2.5, 3 years. And that evolves, that will continue to get better with everything. But what the Gaia benchmark was trying to mimic what people are really trying to do in the workplace a little bit, like rather than, and so not one task over and over, which is still fair game, but the Gaia benchmark really tries to get multi-step planning is kind of a requirement. And so the first when our agent proceeds, the first thing it does is look at that question, thinks quite a while to develop a good plan, and then chases that plan with agentic tools, which may call out to, try to figure out what tools it needs to do to accomplish the job. And it's going to walk through that and update the plan as it goes forward. So the Gaia benchmark gave us a lot of good data to go after seeing these multi-step processes handled that we do see are similar to some of the complex tasks that we get at work, not so many of the simple ones. And so, yeah, that's been a really big one influencing our development. And kind of as we approached it, we have a different approach than a lot of people were using with the agentic platforms at the time. And so it's really harnessing the strength of these powerful models, particularly in the planning and like little things, observations we've seen over time as we go through it is just seeing how strong some of these foundational models can do in respect to others with how persistent they are and how well that plan stays on track and how to know whether it gets stuck in loops and things like that. So the better models tend to do a better job of governing that. And we'll see that's the evolution we'll all kind of see over time as these foundational models keep getting better at a kind of a surprising rate a little bit. We don't have this cliff kind of thing going on. If anything, more players are involved than ever. And then the open source side kind of keeps up with that. So an important part for us with our customer base, a lot of the, you mentioned, sovereign, we see a lot of customers interested in using local resources, air gap resources, especially in banks, different projects, different needs. So an interesting part of us looking at the Gaia benchmark is that we do have components where you can slot in different models. That's a big part of H2O's hybrid platform that I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But really, Gaia gives us also a place to check how the open source or open weights models are doing as well. And H2O also holds the #1 spot for the open model category as well. So we kind of pay attention to the high end and also how close we can start to see some of these open weights models do, because there's a lot of customers that are not cannot use some of these models in a banking industry, especially regulated industries of all types. And so, yeah, Gaia gives us a good place to kind of attack both sides.
Awesome. And talking about banks, Chris, what are some of the use cases that banks are leveraging AI to automate workflows? Chris, you are on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, globally speaking, looking into the North American space as well as the Australian and Singapore space, there are a few use cases that are commonly coming to the top. #1, it's around customer onboarding. As you know that the KYC and regulatory obligations around customer onboarding related to KYC is a key problem that banks are trying to solve. And in this space, from an online onboarding perspective, as well as the branch on channels, behind the scene, there's a lot of steps that takes place. Receiving documentation, identifying what sort of regulatory requirements that we need to fulfill, or the banks need to fulfill from a collecting the customer information perspective. Depends on customer type, depends on various aspects of the customer profile, and having these documents verified, and then information extracted from these documents and then updated into the KIF systems, and then even post onboarding, doing the regular ongoing due diligence, and customer risk rating will trigger some sort of a enhanced due diligence of those customers. So this whole process from an onboarding and then the ongoing life cycle of this customer verification, it's a very laborious, very human intensive process. So some of the banks that I'm seeing, that they're really thinking about, as well as investing in agentic AI technology, where the documents can be digested automatically. The verification of customer information is done behind the scene by the agents, and then the updating the customer information within the KIF platform, and even triggering some of their due diligence processes, and even processing some of the the regular customer risk rating functions. They're all kind of orchestrated by agents. It's a very good use case where commonly I think the banks are trying to see how they can leverage agentic components. And the other laborious task is like kind of making sure your standards and policies up to date within the bank. So the regulations change periodically, and as you know, that there's a very human intensive process to make sure that your standards and policies are up to date, and then you have the procedures and processes in place to meet your policies and standards, and you have the right controls in place to make sure that your processes are executing right. So this whole coverage against the regulatory requirements is an agent's a typical area that you can actually employ agents, where the bank humans staff can be there to monitor how the agents are performing, and then provide the necessary inputs. But the constant verification and constant view of this coverage is another area I see a lot of banks across the board, across globally, kind of looking into it. Maybe I can just touch on one more use case. It's around collections, which is another call center, and collections, which is another area that it takes a lot of energy, as bankers, you guys know that it takes a lot of energy to kind of go after people, and sometimes requesting information from these people, proof of payment and that type of stuff, evidence and things like that, and all payment terms. So scheduling these things and getting that entire interaction with the customer. There's a lot of banks, especially in Australia, as well as in North America. They're looking at or some of them are even using agents at this time to kind of get this whole process automated. So there's a lot of use cases I can think of, but currently these are like these top three that I just want to bring to the table.
That's great. And Mark, I'm curious to see that in action. Can you walk us through how H2O's Gen AI and predictive models are being used together in KYC or AML processes, for example? Do you have an example to show us?
Sure. Yeah, well, I just realized as Chris is talking, I've actually dealt with two of those three things he mentioned just within the last year. So I would definitely vouch for that. And with our document AI, we've spoken with many different customers on some workflows that speak to his initial one, like the KYC, the onboarding, just like there's so much paper kind of floating around, and a lot of regulatory verifications that have to be done and things. And what's exciting, so we've been talking with banks for multiple years since we've had document AI. But as we've seen generative AI take off, and especially the generative AI is getting strong enough to enable these agentic workflows that we're kind of talking about, this autonomous nature can be possible, whereas previously you often had a really heavy use of human in the loop. And so, you're trying to get as far as you can, but we're seeing a big lift that generative AI is providing so that you can really look at these as agentic workflows. So I've got one briefly up on the screen, but the main idea here is that we're getting a couple sources. We're getting a big document for KYC onboarding. This is for a corporate account. So they're just having to verify that the tax ID number is correct and the names are all who they're supposed to be, so that they understand their customer correctly for kind of an anti-money laundering verification. So we're going to get a document up top and then a CSV on the side. And we're going to use agents in a way that we're going to ask for different tasks. And in this way, we're going to look at agents as multiple tasks being broken down here and all coming together for one workflow. So the first one, we have a classification of each page. We're going to get all of these together. Could be junk in there as well. So we kind of have to split out which one we're looking at. And then for each one, you see them split out for various extractions we need. I'm not going to go into those too much, but there's different parts of each document that we need. We're going to combine those. And then the validation is really where this, is doing things that we were struggling to do, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago. So compare what comes back with what was actually in with the customer. And this may sound trivial, but we had hundreds, I think it's like about 150 lines of code, 3, 4 years ago that were just comparing dates, because there's so many different formats. And if they don't use the year and things like this, and it sounds silly, but Gen AI, you speak more like a human. That's why it seems silly to have 150 lines of code, is because as a human, these dates look the same. We all know that if the year's not there, you probably replace it with the current one. In this use case, it probably doesn't quite work, but a lot of them they do. You use shorthand and things like that. And so at the end of the day, we return a final JSON to the user. So jumping really quick, we're going to go through, we used our H2O GPTE platform. So I've jumped straight into this document. There's a lot of kind of tools here we'd invite you to kind of check out. But looking really specifically at a document, I pulled up one of those portions of the PDF here where we're reading an IRS document. This is a synthetic document for a company, but it's very similar to what we were really doing for the corporate, the work we were doing over there. And so from here, we're just trying to extract the tax ID and the company name. And so, and also at first, again, trying to figure out what this was. If this appeared in a 10-page, 20-page document, there's mix of stuff. And so at the bottom here, I've got one sec. There we go. We're just going through and figuring out that this is a 2-page document. And for these two, it's figuring out that it's an IRS document. And then we're extracting a couple of things here. So I'm going to show you that live. So if we're going to go do another one. And this is one feature we want to kind of bring out here too, is that the choice of models that I have in our environment shows how we test things at H2O. So we've got frontier models like Claude, ChatGPT in here, but we also have on-prem models and even our own. And so actually I'm going to use one of the ones that my team built to go and extract some of these in here to quickly show. So for the KYC, we built out a few different prompts. And so here I'm going to IRS filing, but when we look at this in an agentic world, when we really look at the full process, it's going to figure this out all by itself. So we've got a couple of prompts. I'm going to ask for it in JSON, run that. And then we'll see, I've already kind of looked at a couple different models. So I've already looked at one of the new Llama 4 models, and Pixtral is one of our favorite to kind of keep it in the middle range. So here we go, Mississippi. And I'm extracting company name, TIN, from this one. Pretty simple from this one. But even with that, what I wanted to show is that the OCR can be a little different. So Pixtral actually read this 6 over here, which you can see. And this is at 100, just about 100%, 103. That's kind of what some of these models will see. And so the 6, a little grainy, and we intentionally made some of these fonts a little difficult to try and trip it up, mimic kind of fax quality. And this is why we load these models. So I think like one of the things that I guess we've noticed with people, especially when Gen AI first came out, people would try something and kind of get the looks good to me sort of like feeling. Like you throw 2 or 3 things through there and it looks right. And it's like, wow, this is great. Let's go to production. And you really had people thinking that they could just take that step. And so, one of the big things we've seen is that, after a few mistakes at different organizations and just everyone kind of watching everyone else, evaluation and testing is still important. We've got lots of models, they improve all the time, but there's a cost component to those. And so we find customers on different ends of the spectrum looking and trying to measure. And so, just because it looks right on a couple documents or a couple, just data sets of any nature, be careful and understand like, what is this working for you? Because I think, the threshold for every use case is slightly different. Here we have a validation use case that really helps. helps us. We can compare A to B, and if it's wrong, we can invoke a human in the loop. A lot of times, if you don't have that, you have a really high bar for accuracy. And to be honest, as good as some of the models are, they may not hit that. So the takeaway here, and the way that H2O has kind of rallied around some, some of our product we've designed to do some of the evaluations in here, so that you can bring in your data set and test it and start to tweak a lot of the elements that we have in our tool. So this kind of all comes in action in the last one. So here, what we actually get when we run this through is a big JSON object that actually does everything, and it even self-checks. And this is one of the kind of things I was trying to point out. It is starting to warn us of some minor things, like a dot here, but some bigger things. Whereas actually one of the models in this scenario, a different document, was pulling in an extra digit. I think there's an extra 1 in here towards the end. And so that's what we really want to see. So we've got this threshold tuned pretty high, but it's going to go ahead and execute this document from start to finish. The very first thing is it's going to figure out what's on each of those pages, run the necessary extractions, and check itself and get that back to you in a nice, data format that you can toss in your database, or you can plug into your process.
That's great. That's great, Mark. Chris, I'm curious to know, you already mentioned all the top AI use cases in banking, but I'm curious to know, how do you see the banks currently using the agentic AI within their ecosystem? And what is the approach that they are taking to roll out some of those use cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, as you know, that the banks are being bombarded by all technology companies with their, they're all. I think last time I checked, there was like 146 different companies claiming they have an agentic platform, and through the last 5 years that the banks have acquired various technology tools and so on in the AI space. And then they're also, whether depending on whether you're on Azure or whether you're on the AWS platform or Google platform, that there are some native tooling available to you as well. Databricks and companies like Snowflake, they're all kind of introducing their own AI and agentic AI components. So leveraging your existing investments, it's a key driver or key requirement for most of the banks that I see, that these leaders are being asked to make sure that before you go and buy another set of tooling, how do you leverage what you already have. The second area that the banks are looking at is that, how do I bring in the data together, right? So my existing data that I have, structured or unstructured data, as well as bring in some third-party data from a fraud prevention and AML perspective. How do I bring the internal, external, structured, unstructured data along with my AI investment that I've already made over the past years, and then how do you bring them all together and build that agentic AI framework or platform where I can start automating some like human intensive use cases where I can really put my workforce to 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 work from a productive perspective, and then get these laborious tasks out of the way, and then get the agents to do for you. So that's it's a journey that the banks are really looking into it and looking for use cases like I mentioned earlier, and then other use cases that where they can start building these agents, potentially getting agents to build the agents for them, or even build the agents through professional services to get the productivity to the next level.
That's amazing. And Mark, taking into consideration the concept of sovereign AI, which means your data, your environment, our AI, how does deploying models privately help meet data and regulatory requirements in the financial sector? How do you see this?
Yeah, we definitely see this as important, and it can be a little frustrating, as I'm sure some of you on the call know. The regulatory requirements change in different geographies. So we get to see different, you've got like SR 11.7 governing a lot of stuff in the US, and that doesn't mean anything in Australia, for example, but definitely everyone has some form of what you can and should do with your data. You see this in banking and other regulatory industries, governments, and things like that. And so usually geographical boundaries are an important one. And so that's what, something I've seen too, where we'll be working on something inside H2O and get everything ready to show them. And we've demoed everything. And now you go get this instance in AWS or something. And they're like, well, we don't have that in our cloud because they've got to keep their data in the Australian cloud, for example. And so, and there's different machines available and different contracts. So, every bank's working this out in their own way. And you have to actually, a lot of the requirements are that for every project. It's not like a one size fits all answer to. And I think probably that's like the biggest theme I've seen with working with multiple banks is that, especially in this Gen AI journey, is that, you'll hear that one project has access to this model or that model. And then, so you say, oh, great, I've heard so-and-so has this, so let's go ahead and get started. And then, and this happened to me, for real, it was 3 months before we heard, oh, great, we were working with a local model, at the time, a small one that we could just work with easily. And so that's a benefit of, having something to put forward. And so we were working with a 7 billion, model. We proved the use case was decent. We started measuring it and it wasn't really up to the mark. It was good. It showed promise. So it's definitely, but then in the meantime, as we're working through that 2 or 3 months or so, other groups have gotten access to bigger models. And so, we were looking at a different way to try to get another 10, 15 points of accuracy. But then when we heard, some of the foundational models were being, opened up at the bank, it's like, great, let's do that. And it was over 3 months, it might even been 4 or 5 before those models finally were accessible, actually. And so, but the nice thing was that we had the framework in place. So we could keep using those smaller models. It was more of, do we keep working on this and iterating it, or we just wait? But we got to leverage everything we had done originally so that when those other models were there, using a hybrid framework where any model you have access to, really, you can bring in. So we were using that same H2O GPT framework for this project that I was just showing for something totally different. But we were there because when they got their regulatory approval for this, it was the data really that made the difference. So the data was more locked down. It had like personal PII, let's say, personally identifiable information. You see this in medical with PHI and things like that. So for everything, you just have to take a real extra care. And Gen AI can be kind of easy with us not thinking about what data is sometimes too, like a prompt, just asking something. If we say, hey, can you anonymize this or something, you're sending that somewhere. And I think like early days, people were sending that to the public endpoints. I hope that probably most people have learned since then, don't do that. Don't send your data for just commercial reasons, but especially these same like regulatory reasons. And depending on how you look at that, so like you say, with sovereignty, it actually goes in many parts of the stack. And so, people are learning, like having access to these models are one part. Some people need to have their own models. If you're using your own data, that can be pretty extreme, either with a fine-tuned part or a full model, actually. And so, H2O's got tools kind of being ready for people doing any part of that. When we started DanU, we kind of did that, seeing that people might want their entire model from the ground up. But fine-tuning, watching what data goes in and what data comes out of these, with leakage and things. So I think people are, fortunately, most of the time, like the banks tend to be nervous and conservative. And I think, we were at one of our conferences and, there was a comment about using ChatGPT 3.5 at the time, and this is maybe a year and a half ago. Someone was using that in production for some small use case, and everyone else just like bug eyes. I couldn't believe it because, they are very nervous about kind of bringing those technologies in. But like Chris is saying, we've gone through years now where people are figuring out how they move within the infrastructure they have. And different people are taking different courses with that. But that it's something that we're trying to help people do. So wherever you are, again, so many of our customers have been air gapped for long periods of time before Gen AI. That's been something we're familiar with, and we just keep seeing that. We keep seeing that through our customers trying to meet these regulatory needs. to keep everything as on-premise, knowing where the data is, and you have command of the whole platform too. So that's not just what cloud you use, and whether you have it local and on-prem. It's not just the data, it's not just the models, it's really every part of the stack. So when you do keep it local, you have just an extra measure of security. Every part of that stack. You can control it. You keep things constant rather than having moving parts underneath you sometimes. So all those can be advantages that our customers will seek in any given scenario.
And
I just want to add to what Mark said, Bruna. So just
yeah,
just
of
a,
course.
just a story that somebody that I know worked for Austrac, which is the Australian regulator, and the last 2 years they have really gone through a major shift in kind of understanding the power of AI, power of agentic AI, generative AI, and then this generative AI wave last 2 years really helped, 2 3 years last really helped even the regulator to kind of open up and start really understand the mechanics behind how these models are built, and that from the LLM to now they are now we are seeing in the industry like the functional language models, FLMs, where the models are fine-tuned with a narrow specific data set, where a model that talks about figuring out uh, what's the best way for me to process collections, doesn't have to worry about any of the medical stuff, doesn't have to worry about anything else. It just like it only focuses on the collections and finance and behavioral pattern on people and so on. So I think the regulators, so speaking speaking to a person who's actually on the Austrac regulatory board, they have gone through training and gone through a lot of education on their side to kind of understand what the pitfalls are as well as the benefits on the AI side, and they're really adopting as well. So I think we're going to see a big change going forward, especially on the financial crime fraud side, where any ways the banks can spend to kind of reduce the fraudster impact. It's just going to be a benefit for everybody. So.
Yeah, and Chris, what would be the advice you would give to executives trying to ensure their AI programs deliver measurable business outcomes? And what's the secret sauce of H2O?
So I mean, there are two. I have seen there are two different types. So if you look at the past 5 7 years, right? So the data offices were the initial pioneers. The data CDOs and the CDAOs, Chief Data and Analytics Office, initially pioneered any sort of AI in the past five years. 2015, 16, 17, then like businesses didn't really care about AI. Working for Scotiabank and working for CBA, that from a analytics data platform perspective, we had to go and educate the business, and then they were like skeptical. They were like very conservative in terms of adopting some of these ideas. But what I see now in the last few months or maybe last year, there is a huge shift in the business leaders. The guys who run day-to-day banking, the guys who run credit card, the guys who run fraud and AML. These the non-techie folks, non-analytics people, non-data people, they are kind of very enthusiastic about AI and Gen AI and predictive AI and agentic AI, and then they see the value, and they see the use cases they could come up with, and then they are reaching out. So the problem is there's good and bad, right? So when they reach out, sometimes they don't reach out through their CDAO platforms. They're just going and reaching out to various vendors, and then they're trying to onboard their own tooling. So now there is a gotcha, because you don't want to be bringing in multiple tool sets and then trying to get a like the commercial banking wants to go and do something else, and the retail bank want to do something else, and then you got a mixed bag of technology set. So you really want to watch out. You got to have a plan and a strategy. Work with your data offices or data analytics office, and then have a proper platform built to enable AI for the entire bank so that you can really leverage your investments than kind of going off in tangents. So the good news is the business is thinking about it, business sees the value, and they have the use cases so that they kind of close to the action. At the same time, there is a platform that you need to enable to make sure that you can leverage like the data, build data once and use everywhere. Similarly, build their AI once and leverage everywhere else. So there's a lot of connective tissue between the pieces. There are models built on the predictive side, and then you want to be able to leverage those models, in your use cases from an agentic perspective, right? So you have a predictive model that tells you, what's the best way what are the rules that you need to enable on the fraud detection side. You want to make sure that those predictive models are being used in your fraud rule optimization agent. So that'll be the cautionary, positive cautionary message that I would say. It's that, collectively work together and build their AI platform for your organization so that you can leverage the assets more effectively as well as cohesively across the organization. So.
And looking ahead, what are some of the Gen AI trends or innovations that financial institutions should be watching closely? Is there anything else that you would like to share, Mark, if you want to jump into?
I mean, I think, what we'll see, I mean, watching closely is that, just these models keep improving over time. And so I think coming from a data scientist perspective, we've been watching a lot of leaderboards for, it feels like 3 years now. And there's a new one all the time as one gets almost completed. And so we need harder and harder questions. Gaia comes from that, but also even the way we evaluate LLMs in general. And so, what people on this call might, I feel like I've been living and breathing that for the last 2.5 years or so, watching LMSys, watching all the open eval leaderboards. There's so many of those that we see, but probably a lot of people don't realize that. And so what's been happening, I think will just continue to happen. And so if you think, we've once we got GPT-3, it started to really open things up for people, and ChatGPT is when the public started to notice. And it gets iterations on maybe a slow basis, maybe a couple quarters or so could feel like it doesn't change that much. But what's happening in the meantime is more competitors, more models, people distinguishing themselves. All of a sudden, the foundational models are big and they can be expensive. And so, and that can be the only way you can get a use case done. And we know that with our agentic AI, we get that top score by using the absolute latest models. But again, customers are interested either for your sovereignty reasons, your air gap solution reasons, or just cost. You might want a local model or something. And so that's something we definitely see as well, that when we started, we have our own, small models in both the vision space and the large language model space. And each of those has maintained a lot of action, I guess, since we created those. And so things keep getting better. So a task you may have not been able to do last time you tried it, especially if you tried, a couple of years ago. Now we've got, this AI working, but it still didn't work. Well, as these get better, they're going to start to unlock more and more use cases. And so, to some people, I think it feels like these big plateaus, these stair steps that we're taking. But what's really happening, is just different things innovate all the time. And overall, we're still seeing the pace continues. And I saw we got there's a two-part question coming in from chat, but I'll kind of loop that in a little bit with agentic AI, because I think that's why agentic AI keeps being interesting. And so for me, I know I saw a lot of people were looking at agentic very early on and trying to get code. So let's just say with agentic AI, we're looking for autonomous, semi-autonomous, but really a high degree of autonomous, so that with minimal human supervision, that you can achieve a task. And so that's really what it is. So the workflow I kind of put up, a key piece that we really couldn't close that circuit on, was the final evaluation, and just getting everything to a high enough level so that our rate that we really need to involve the humans in has just been really high. And people understand that, and we try to focus on how to get humans in and out of that process as quickly as possible. And so you can still reduce the labor of that. But now, we can really start to hit 100% a lot more with that. But there's so many processes out there, especially the trivial ones that your people don't want to be doing as well. Let them do more more creative things, spend more time doing a lot of the thinking, and get some of these laborious processes out of the way. And what's driving that is just the strength of the AI improvements that just keeps happening every week, every month. We're seeing these kinds of improvements with the models, and they really start unlocking new things. So it can feel slow sometimes, but it's just always happening. So we'll watch that occur as well. And so yeah. Not going to tackle the SR 11.7, but if we get time in the end, but I would also just kind of drop something in that, yeah, H2O has definitely been paying attention to that part of the question with something that you can probably check out on our website with MRM and some things like that. So we've definitely put some really specific thought. We don't really have time to get into that in the next few minutes, but yeah, it's a good question. And we definitely are addressing that part. So yeah, see what we have in mind and how we're helping people evaluate some of those models that way with respect to SR 11.7 and the guidance that NIST put some stuff out as well to try to help people through this. It's intentionally ambiguous at times, and so there's not a hard answer to that question. But definitely, yeah, go ahead and check out what H2O is thinking for MRM model risk management.
Awesome. Chris, do you want to add something?
I mean, definitely, like Mark said, that there's lots going on, and then the space is like evolving, like daily, right? I wouldn't even say weekly, it's just daily. This is a shifting sand. So from going back to your earlier question around, how do you want to approach this? I would really take a cautionary approach, being a financial services organization. Start with POCs, start with take some of your low-hanging use cases and see how the whole end-to-end will work, right? So some of the agentic platforms, including H2O, it's evolving in the space where that it's almost like a driverless agent. So agents will generate the agents for you. Those are quick wins. So you can take some of the simple use cases and see how well you can get this automated, and with the minimal kind of the human intervention. So the whole idea is to have these agents kind of autonomously operate, and then to be able to have the explainability so that it can make decisions and you can see why these decisions are made, and then so that agents can kind of define the value proposition for you after the decisions are made. So take a cautionary approach, and then I think you should be good.
Awesome. We've got some questions here in the Q&A. Mark
Yeah,
already
I'm going to try Antonio's really quick. I think we just have like a minute or two left.
we
yeah.
have
Okay, so yeah, it's a really good question. So I encourage you to read it there. I'm not going to reread, but what is the separating factor? Because you've got the big foundational models offering so much to try to be a complete solution as well. And so, I think one thing is really like kind of goes back to who H2O is. And so especially as a data scientist, before Gen AI, like our big tool is and continues to be for a lot of people. So driverless AI. And so on the predictive side, and it can approach deep learning, tabular problems that people were solving with machine learning and AI, pre-Gen AI. And so that tool, what it really was actually going back to the basics of some really key algorithms, open source algorithms, very similar, being used by everyone, similar to how the foundational models are used in the Gen AI era. And then what driverless AI really put on top of it was some really strong data science practices that we got out of Kaggle, actually. There's a lot of Kaggle tricks that were somewhat known, but not everybody was doing that. And not everybody was using this or that. Something like a target encoding just got a lot of mileage, and you would see it showing up all the time in Kaggle trying to achieve the top of a leaderboard. And so it's that last mile. That's what, we have a lot of people who are focused on that, trying to get into the top of Kaggle. And so we're using those kind of techniques. You bring that forward to Gen AI, and you see the same thing emerging out of the Gaia leaderboard, which, by the way, I've realized we haven't really introduced it. It's GAIA for anybody trying to look this up. So, but topping that leaderboard was taking some really strong engineering and getting a really good base with a simple approach. It didn't start with complex flows. It started with just really attacking the problem specifically with prompts that are really trying to cover a lot of the edge cases in a really smart way. That's our general approach. And then as we got close and close to the guy, top of that leaderboard, we put some of that. We have 3 members on that team, Kaggle Grandmasters on that team, that kind of helped us get a few extra points as well. And so it looks the same way. So I think it's a little bit of, this is who we are as a company, is trying to help you unlock even more value than the models themselves. And so that's really putting these together. And so when you're saying agentic a lot and saying these foundational models, our way through these agent platforms is to use whatever model works for you and try to be persistent about it, try to get the planning right, and try to help you achieve that task. Having integrations, but also with a focus on getting the task achieved at the end of the day. And I think that's really where our Gaia results speak to, is that, we have to have tools in there, and we brought tools in with those integrations. And some people are going to stop there and leave it to you to try to get the best value out of it, or realize that maybe you're not. And so some of the stuff we're bringing is the expertise that we have doing data science and AI for so long, and have some of the people that really know how to strive for that last mile, and put that into the tool as best we can. So you're going to get off the shelf. You're going to start with thousands of lines of a prompt that really help you try to get from the top to the bottom as accurately as possible of what you were trying to achieve in the first place.
Great. Thank you, Mark. We've got another one here. Are there common myths or misconceptions about Gen AI adoption in financial services that you'd want to clear up?
Yeah, I mean, I can take that. I can take that question. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, I think it's evolved the last couple of years. I would say that. So I mean, the minute that end users, the general public, started interacting with ChatGPT and DeepSeek and other models, it actually, some of the myths kind of went away, because some of the leaders at banks, they themselves, as part of Copilot, or what that Copilot is now being integrated into almost all the Microsoft tooling. So most of the myths are mostly kind of diminished. There might be some few here and there, around, but the industry had evolved, I would say, the last 2 years, especially the financial industry has evolved in a big way. That there's a lot of open-mindedness, and there's a lot of adoption. I see that's going on, like from an engineering to business. There's a lot of adoption, and folks are they're really opening their eyes and seeing the value that AI could bring in here.
Amazing. So before we wrap up, Mark, what evaluation metrics or techniques do you believe are often overlooked by financial institutions when validating AI models?
I think there's, maybe in some sense, like what we normally see with a lot of our businesses is already handled a little bit because you are regulated, so well. I think there's kind of a difference of opinions on like how you need to achieve some of these, because, again, it's regulated, but it's also very open-ended. And so, you have to be clear about what you're testing. And so I think to some extent, those don't go away. You still have to follow the process you're doing, like model governance. And so a lot of the people, especially, Goose at H2O, who's worked in this, in that space for 15 years, is often really kind of stepping back and saying, look, it is Gen AI, but these are NLP models, and we can evaluate them the same as NLP models. Whether for you that means looking at the embedding space, for the data scientists on the call, there's still embeddings out there, and we're still walking through a similar kind of process. So if you had NLP workflows, in many cases, those same metrics are going to continue to be useful. And so I think early on, Gen AI feels so different. It is, and the level of the models is different. But yet it doesn't really take you away from how you should be doing, how you should be evaluating processes, AI processes, over time. And so actually, I would really say it's kind of it depends, but it depends. Really don't look away from what you've been using all along, and just figure out how you can get a current Gen AI solution evaluated in the same way. And so even if you're using, if you're trying a zero-shot prompt or something, you got to be careful that it's working for the use case you have. You really need to understand the boundaries a little bit. And so that's why, again, it looks good to me. I've tried 3-5 documents and I'm good to go. Again, most of the time in banks, that doesn't work in production, but you did see early on a lot of people trying to do that kind of thing. And so, we have to go back to really still treating this like a data science problem, and being careful about how we test, I suppose. So I wouldn't say necessarily a single benchmark. It's like almost kind of knowing how you should evaluate. Like myself, we looked at the Open Compass benchmarks a lot when we were doing vision language, because if you look at most of the LLM benchmarks, they don't test incorporating image, and things like that. And so that's what we strove to do with OCR. And even as good as the Open Compass benchmark was, actually for trying to do document AI things, there's really only 2 sub benchmarks out of like something like 24 or so, that really focused on it. So I think it's overall the theme more than a specific answer here, I guess, is just make sure you're fitting the problem that you have. Your use case, what is it achieving, what tools are you bringing in, and how can you test that those tools are arriving at the right solution. And in many cases in the banking, what's really required is that you're using the tools correctly throughout the tool chain, not just that the final answer looks correct. So I think that's a big one that maybe is different, that our banks approach a little differently from some of the other industries.
And I also just want to add to that, Tim, what Mark said. Also, I mean, what I've done in the past is just kind of pick use cases that can drive, that I can measure the results, and then gives me quick wins, and also give you some sort of a bottom line shift or the top line shift. This way, you can actually you can from the amount of what you're spending to what the business driver, what's the business value that it's generating, you can truly measure the outcome and measure the results, and then kind of produce the ROI that you're looking for, than just kind of randomly uh, spinning and spending the cash.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. Because that's one of the things that a lot of people got had difficulty with, and it is difficult, is that as much as I say keep using the same metrics, one trouble here is Gen AI is opening up new things. And so like if we're trying to write a marketing email, there was a lot of that early on, is using it to generate text and big walls of text, because it's very good at that. Early on, that was probably the most common use case, is seeing Gen AI develop something that, like, write an email or write a marketing pitch or something like that, so that humans don't have to necessarily. But that does not fit in the same machine learning. It's very difficult to measure the accuracy of that, but it doesn't go away. So you just have to think a different way about it. You cannot use an F1 metric, or a blue score, we realize is abysmal when you try to do 1,000 tokens of text. It's all wrong. It's always super low scores. And so it's kind of almost nonsense. But what Chris said yet is still true. And so you have to really think about how you do that. And so unfortunately, sometimes that means bring out some humans to judge some of these, pull in 100, pull in a couple hundred. You're still getting the value because your solution off the ground is really quick. And it could be, that's not the only way to do it, but that's the way a lot of people would do it, is like, how do I feel about the response? Let's test the response. Is this good enough? Yes, no. And I've dealt with several of those use cases in the last year. And those can be tricky too. People, literally, we did like 18, yeses, and at first point, like, people judged it really narrowly, and then it was time to bring up the documentation with statistics and everything, and people really got down to what it needed to work and all the documentation they really needed, and they actually started shifting the judgments, and all of a sudden something that was like 95% was coming in at 60, and we had an uphill climb, but it was correct. It was correct to be paying that much attention and really take this seriously. And that's what your regulatory, your regulations are kind of asking of you. Take this seriously. It's still better than it was. That solution got off the ground. We can do things we couldn't do. Like, that's what was really happening at the end of the day. But we did have to try harder. So yeah, it's a great point, Chris.
Well, any closing thoughts or key takeaways for our attendees? We do not have any other questions in the Q&A. So before we wrap up, just wanted to check if there are any closing thoughts or remarks.
Right. Again, I'll just go back to the same same point that I was trying to make. Like, keep it small, keep it tangible, and stay away from science projects. Try to make it work, and putting it to production, and make it work in real life, and see whether you can drive the business value, right? So you can, whatever the ROI that you're trying to drive, because there's a lot of myths out there. A lot of people will come and claim that they can do this, they can do that. but they will take you in this spin, right? So stay away from the science projects and then really go and tackle a use case that, just get it done and then put it to production, and that'll be my advice to any bank.
Yeah, I would say pretty similar. We've seen this pre-Gen AI and especially in Gen AI, and this is especially true of like the regulatory environment and how locked down your data sources have to be. Is that one kind of gotcha in the same way that Chris is speaking? Is that you bring in a data set that looks similar to your production data, but you don't have access to that production data for this model. You got to go through approvals and all of that. And so a mistake, I guess I would see made that one doing what Chris is saying is wrong is you're trying to do exactly what he's saying. You're trying to prove, oh yeah, we think this is not going to be a pipe dream. We can see that this is going to get 80%. But you do have to be careful that when you bring in some data set off the shelf or something you found on Google or something like that, and bring it in thinking it's going to emulate what the actual real production use case is, just know there's edge cases lurking everywhere. So just pay attention to that. So I can personally vouch for many, many times that this happens with customers. And it's a difficult problem because the data really, it's going to take a lot of times, it's going to take some approvals you may not have, and that's just some time you have. And so you do want to prototype, but even while you're trying to do that, you got to be careful that you're really, actually, looking at documents. Well, I would say documents together and living that. This is true of data sources of any type. How many columns you have, how big the data is, all these kind of things that can go from a toy environment into a bigger environment. Be careful. And so that's what we've seen with our customers over many years. And that's really why I think, with H2O, I flipped through a lot of those things on the side, but I would invite everyone to kind of check out what we're thinking, because, with our platform, we're trying to solve these things that customers are bringing to us. The evaluation, looking at different models, the tabs in there are well thought out. And so what are you trying to do? We haven't spoken much about, RAG, this is a common thing. So with a platform, for us, we're focusing right now on agentic, getting the most out of these foundational models, continuing to see how, as the progress there improves, it unlocks more and more workflows that customers can do at an autonomous level. That's why we keep saying agentic so much, is because we keep seeing this march towards more and more use cases that can be unlocked that previously weren't. But a lot of customers are still doing RAG, retrieval augmented generation, throw a lot of documents in, ask questions out of there. And so, I think like the way we stay close to our customers, a lot of this evaluation, the MRM kind of needs that, we're developing tools to help our customers solve many of these different things. And so the use case you see tomorrow is going to maybe need one or two of those tools, and the one you see, in a month or 3 months down the line, it may need a different set of 2 or 3 of these things. So everything kind of under one roof, using the best to get what situation you're in at different times. That's kind of what we're trying to offer here.
That's great. Thank you, Chris and Mark. I'm sure they would. Go ahead, Chris.
I said thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. If you want to test H2O GPTE, you can access our website. It's on the homepage. Just click on chat now. It is as simple as that. So take a look, test it for yourself. If you have any further questions, please reach out to us. I'll share the contacts via email as well, and the recording will also be made available. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Chris,
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you. Bye.